From now on, all the enchantments will be ordered based on how good they are. I will start with the least good in that tier, and then I will move up to the best in that tier from now on, since we have reached the point where we're going to actually start talking about good enchantments that you actually want. And as always, we're ignoring Lost Cities for this tier list since that's its own meta. And of course the usual thanks to Calebrune3's amazing enchantment descriptions. Anyway, on to the video. This video will be focusing on the fine tier, which are enchantments that are just pretty solid. They have a nice use case, they may have some downsides in other cases, but are overall pretty good. The first enchantment we're going to talk about here is Bluntness. This enchantment reduces your attack damage. Now that obviously sounds pretty bad, but it has an amazing use case with the enchantment Purification. Purification is an axe-exclusive enchantment that gives a small chance to purify mobs it hits. Most importantly, it can purify zombie villagers, turning them back into normal villagers. And obviously, since we want to purify the villager, we're going to want to do the least damage possible to the villager, so that then we can purify it into a normal villager instead of leaving it as a zombie villager or accidentally killing it. And Bluntness is a great way to reduce our attack damage so that we can get more hits in to purify the villager. If you want a more detailed explanation on what a villager reroller is and exactly how it works, check out CD-Stick's video, which will be linked in the description. Now, let's talk about some of the downsides of this enchantment. It is only useful in this one specific scenario. Outside of this one specific scenario, it is a bad enchantment, so I can't rank it too high, even though that one use case is pretty damn good. There are also other enchantments that can kind of do the same function as Bluntness, so it's not completely necessary, and those enchantments are much easier to get than Bluntness.
Alright, so the first two enchantments we'll be talking about are Heating and Cooling. Heating will increase your temperature stage by 1, and Cooling will decrease your temperature stage by 1. However, these don't protect you from hot and cold weather the same way Armor Liner does. They just flat increase your temperature or flat decrease it. These enchantments are definitely more useful at the start of the game than they are later in the game, because once you have Aussie Armor Liner, you really don't need these.
Heating and chilling are not that insane, but they're a nice little thing to have if you already have some heat resistance or cold resistance. For example, if you have a Fire Dragon's Eye, you could enchant all of your armor with heating and never have to deal with any cold temperature ever again. And since you have fire resistance from Fire Dragon's Eye, which is a great bauble that you will probably be using for your entire playthrough, temperature will become literally non-existent. You will never have any more temperature issues ever again. And for that reason, I can't rank these enchantments any lower.
Luck of the Sea has a max level of 4 due to Ancient Tomes, and it increases the chance of getting treasure by about 2% per level, and greatly lowers the chance of getting junk by about 2% per level, and slightly lowers the chance of getting a fish by about 0.15% per level. Advanced Luck of the Sea has a max level of 3 and is supposedly better, but it's kind of hard to confirm because the code is just super hard to read. Lure has a max level of 4 due to an Ancient Tome and gives you a 5 seconds times the level decreased wait time for something to appear. Typically when you're fishing, it takes 5 to 30 seconds before a fish will appear. Advanced Lure has a max level of 3 and is literally the same as Lure 4, except with an added 15% chance every time you go fishing for it to be Lure 5. This means that normally it gives you a 20-second reduced wait time, but occasionally it gives you a 25-second decreased wait time.
Lure and Luck of the Sea are here representing the entirety of fishing in RLcraft. I am not super stoked on fishing. I think it's kind of a slow method of progression, but at least I can appreciate its consistency. Fishing is just simply a slow, passive way of progressing. It's not something I particularly enjoy, or even think is a great way of progressing. Overall, fishing is a perfectly fine playstyle. I don't think it's super strong or super weak. It's kind of just a thing you can do that won't hurt you, and then they'll give you some nice loot occasionally.
For shield enchantments, Empowered Defense has a max level of 2 and works on pretty much every shield besides bauble shields like the Ankh shield and Obsidian shield. It gives a 20 plus 5 times the level % chance to negate the shield from being disabled when you're hit, and deals 22.5 times the level % of the damage the enemy deals right back to them. The damage it deals is only triggered when the shield doesn't get disabled. The enchantment also knocks enemies further back when it happens, so it's somewhat obvious when it triggers.
This enchant really does not make a difference, but it's still noticeable enough to be considered fine tier in my opinion. It's a perfectly solid enchantment that you're happy to put on your shield. Knockback is actually a pretty decent shield enchantment. Knocking enemies farther away while you're shielding is just a really nice bonus to have, and it's kind of noticeable. Yeah, I bet you didn't know you could put knockback on shields, huh? The big thing that makes knockback on shields so much better than knockback on weapons is agency. You have agency on when you want to block and how you want to block. Whereas you don't have agency on when the weapon will knock the enemy back, it will always knock back.
Punch has a max level of 3 due to an enchanting tome, and does 3 times the level of the enchantment blocks of knockback. Advanced Punch has a max level of 2. Advanced Punch 1 is the same as Punch 3, so 9 blocks of knockback, and Advanced Punch 2 is 15 blocks of knockback.
Bows are a ranged weapon, and Punch lets you keep that range advantage due to the extra knockback, which is a perfectly solid effect, not too impactful, but still nice to have.
Pull Speed is an enchantment exclusive to the switch bow, which has a max level of 3, and increases the bow draw speed per level. However, this draw speed increase is less than Rapid Fire's, making it the worst of all 3 draw speed increasing enchantments. It's not incompatible with Rapid Fire or Strafe, so it's basically just a third draw speed increasing enchantment that you can add to your bow.
Pull Speed is the difference maker for the switch bow. Since the switch bow can have all the enchantments a normal bow can, the difference maker is it gets the exclusive Pull Speed enchantment, which is only for the switch bows, whereas normal bows don't get that. So some people believe that this Pull Speed enchantment makes the switch bow better than a Dragonbone bow, even though that's just not true. Still, Pull Speed is a pretty fine enchantment. I have to give it some points for being able to make people consider the switch bow.
Smite itself does a max of plus 15 damage at level 6. Lesser Smite does a max of 6.25 damage at level 5.
Smite is just a really decent damage buff early game that can be quite useful. Of course, it is worse in the late game when you will have Advanced or Supreme Sharpness, which are just strictly better. But considering how insanely common undead enemies are, Smite definitely earns a place in the fine tier.
Arrow Recovery has a max level of 3 and has a 25% times level chance to give you back a vanilla arrow on damaging an enemy. Non-damaging arrows such as the Love Arrow will not trigger this. So every time you hit an enemy with a Love Arrow or every time you miss with a normal arrow, you will not have a chance of recovering the arrow.
Arrow Recovery, for the most part, is a worse infinity enchantment. However, it does have a few use cases, such as the fact that it is compatible with Strafe, whereas Infinity is not. So if you are doing a Strafe bow, which is generally more DPS, but you don't get Infinity, Arrow Recovery is pretty important for that. And at the bare minimum, it's an okay replacement for Infinity, perfectly deserving of fine tier.
Smelting has a max level of 1, and it makes so any drops from the blocks you mine will be smelted. This is actually pretty cool because since it works with Fortune, it makes so mining stuff like iron blocks can yield more than one of that resource. Smelter, however, has a max level of 1 and is basically just smelting but better. It has the same effect as smelting where it automatically smelts blocks that you mine and can be used with Fortune. However, it has 2 things that smelting doesn't have. The first thing is that smelting does not work with the L menu prospecting perk, which multiplies drops even further, and Smelter does. The second thing is you can cancel the effect by holding shift and mining a block, and it will not smelt the block and you'll just get the ore version. Of the 2 enchantments, I would definitely always pick Smelter because it's strictly better. However, if you can't find Smelter, smelting is pretty nice provided you have Fortune.
Both of these enchantments are just simply really convenient to have. No complaints, simple convenient enchantments for mining.
Pushing has a max level of 1 and pushes enemies away while you're drawing the bow back. This one's sort of weird because it's not at all like Punch. It's when you draw the bow back, not when you hit enemies with the arrow.
This enchantment, in my opinion, is a slightly better version of Punch, since Punch only applies when you actually hit the mob, meaning it would already be knocked back anyway. It's not really adding anything new to your bow, it's just enhancing what it already does, which is definitely not bad. But, in my opinion, adding a whole new element to your bow is much stronger.
Luck Magnification has a max level of 2 and gives you the luck potion effect according to the enchantment's level if it's in your main hand or your offhand.
so Luck Magnification 2 will give you Luck 2 for as long as you hold the weapon out. For every point you have in Luck via potion effects or other equipment, the loot that you get from chests that are randomized or not pre-generated has boosted odds at giving you rare items. That's what Luck typically does. However, if you're equipping a Luck Magnification in your main hand, each Luck point is then also equivalent to a looting level and increases your critical damage.
So if I had an advanced looting 3 sword with Luck Magnification 2 on it, and my looting rolled a 14,
Luck Magnification would increase that to a 16, and any other luck that I have additionally would raise it even further.
Luck Magnification conflicts with Ash Destroyer. Weirdly enough, I don't know why it would conflict. I don't know why giving yourself luck conflicts with doing bonus damage, but that's besides the point. Anyway, it conflicting with Ash Destroyer is quite a big downside. However, Luck Magnification works in the offhand, so you can have it as a nice little offhand luck booster, which, well, not that great, is still fine enough.
Disarmament has a max level of 5 and has a 25% chance to apply speed 2 for 1 second and weakness 255 for 2 plus the level seconds. If this triggers, there's also a 5% times the level chance to disarm the enemy. On average, at max level, 1 in every 20 hits will make the enemy drop their weapon. However, they can pick it back up, so if you're trying to make them drop it, just be ready to catch it.
I personally would have put this enchantment in Why Bother, since I do not believe giving the opponent weakness 255 is really that great. I can guarantee you the majority of deaths in RLcraft are from being surprised, and you have to hit a mob for the weakness to take effect, so it doesn't really give you safety. I argue for it to be lower, but I can see why some people feel that the weakness actually matters. It doesn't really matter for me that much, but if other people think the weakness actually matters, sure enough, I'm compromising here. All fire aspects except Lesser Fire Aspect 1 and all forms of Vanilla Fire Aspect go up here simply due to the fact that they enable Ash Destroyer, one of the best damage boosting enchantments in the game. If it wasn't for Ash Destroyer, these enchantments would be in the Why Bother tier, but Ash Destroyer is so good that it makes these mediocre enchantments good for their ability to work with it.
Subject English has a max level of 4 and deals 0.8 plus the level times 0.3 additional damage to a max of 2. It also does 3 times your level additional damage to quote-unquote smart enemies, which includes villagers, witches, zombie pigmen, iron golems, vindicators, evokers, illusioners, wolves, and snowmen? Somebody's got to explain to me who thought this was smart. Oh, and it also has a 40% chance to silence any of these mobs, which, I guess if you want a quiet village, you could do that.
The bonus damage against specifically smart enemies is completely useless. You're really only using this enchantment for the +2 damage, which is not bad. Free +2 damage is free +2 damage.
Clearskies Favor has a max level of 6 and deals +5 damage if there's no weather, -3.6 damage if there is weather, and if you're underground, aka under 1 block, it won't give you the damage boost for no weather, but it'll still give you the negative if there is weather. It also has a 0.75% chance to make it clear weather every hit if you're not under any blocks.
Weather is not a super common event in RLcraft, so the downside is not really that bad. And yes, the downside still obviously sucks, but on average, you're still getting about +5 damage. It's just a nice little damage boost you can have, similar to Subject English.
Underwater Strider has a max level of 3 and functions slightly different to Depth Strider. It gives you a 1.3 plus 0.4 times level increased movement speed when fully submerged underwater, and also, of course, gets rid of the underwater walk speed penalty. I find that Underwater Strider is definitely more helpful when it comes to exploring oceans and that sort of thing than Depth Strider. However, if you just want to place a water bucket or move up a small stream of water, Depth Strider is definitely going to be more helpful.
Underwater Strider is definitely decent. It's still a worse version of Depth Strider though, since it doesn't have that added utility, since it has to be fully submerged for it to have any effect. And Depth Strider is still perfectly fine while submerged. I personally choose Depth Strider over Underwater Strider simply for the utility. However, Underwater Strider is still a perfectly fine enchantment. Curse of Holding gives the player weakness, bad luck, and mining fatigue while holding the item with Curse of Holding. Now that's quite bad on paper. However, it's absolutely vital for purification setups, and it's actually quite a common mob drop. Many mob armor pieces will have Curse of Holding already attached to them, so make sure you pick up all the dungeon loot you can find, because chances are one of those pieces will have Curse of Holding. Without Curse of Holding, purification setups become super inconsistent, and you'll accidentally kill your villager a whole bunch of times, and that really sucks. Curse of Holding is simply a really great consistency booster. Of course, you could alternatively use Bluntness, but Bluntness is so rare that I don't even consider it. It's only really reliable to get from villagers, but again, that's a super rare chance, and Curse of Holding is much easier to get. And that's it for this video. Also, woo! 1,000 subs! Pretty cool, huh?